The dusty streets of Millbrook, Texas, had seen many travelers come and go, but none quite like Emma Rodriguez. She stepped off the rickety stagecoach on a sweltering Tuesday morning in July 1952, her worn dress hanging loose on her thin frame, a battered suitcase held together with rope clutched in her trembling hands. The townspeople gathered around the general store stopped their conversations mid-sentence, their eyes following every step she took down Main Street. Emma kept her chin up despite the whispers that followed her like tumbleweeds in the wind. She had traveled 300 miles from El Paso with nothing but $23 sewn into the lining of her coat, and a letter from her deceased aunt promising her a job at the local diner. The letter was 2 months old, and Emma prayed the position was still available. Her stomach had been empty for the better part of 2 days, and her pride was all that kept her walking toward Murphy's diner instead of collapsing right there on the wooden sidewalk. The diner's bell chimed as she pushed through the door, and conversations died down as patrons turned to stare. Emma approached the counter where a heavy-set woman with graying hair was wiping down coffee cups. "Excuse me, ma'am," Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm looking for Mrs. Murphy. I'm Emma Rodriguez. My Aunt Maria Santos wrote to me about a job here." The woman's expression softened slightly. "I'm Dorothy Murphy. Maria was a good woman, God rest her soul. She mentioned you in her letters before she passed, said you were having a hard time back in El Paso." Dorothy's eyes took in Emma's appearance from her scuffed shoes to her hollow cheeks. "The position's still open, but I'll be honest with you, child. It doesn't pay much and the hours are long." Emma's relief was palpable. "Thank you, Mrs. Murphy. I'll work hard, I promise. I just need a chance." Dorothy nodded and poured Emma a cup of coffee, sliding a plate of leftover biscuits across the counter. "You look like you could use this. There's a boarding house 2 blocks down where you can rent a room by the week. Mrs. Patterson runs it, and she's fair with folks who are down on their luck." As Emma ate, she became aware of the conversations resuming around her, but now she was the topic. "Poor thing looks like she hasn't eaten in days," one woman murmured. "Wonder what brought her to our little town," another added. Emma tried to ignore the stares and focus on the food, but she couldn't shake the feeling that her arrival in Millbrook was going to change everything. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the diner as Emma finished her meal, grateful for Dorothy's kindness, but acutely aware that she was now the subject of every conversation in town. She had hoped to blend in, to quietly start over, but it seemed that wasn't going to be possible in a place where everyone knew everyone else's business. Marcus Thompson had been watching the scene unfold from his corner booth, his coffee growing cold as he studied the young woman who had just walked into his world. The Thompson family owned the largest ranch in 3 counties, and Marcus was known throughout the region for his business acumen and his bachelor status. At 32, He had his pick of eligible women from the finest families in Texas, but something about Emma Rodriguez captured his attention in a way that no debutante ever had. He observed how she carried herself with dignity despite her circumstances, how she spoke softly but with conviction, and how she thanked Dorothy with genuine gratitude rather than the entitled expectation he was accustomed to seeing from others. When she finished eating and gathered her belongings to leave, Marcus made a decision that would surprise everyone in Millbrook, including himself. Dorothy noticed Marcus's intense interest and shook her head. "Don't you go getting any ideas, Marcus Thompson. That girl's been through enough without you adding to her troubles." But Marcus was already standing, his mind made up about something he couldn't quite name yet. Emma pushed through the diner door and stepped back into the harsh sunlight, squinting as her eyes adjusted. She had a job and a lead on a place to stay, which was more than she had hoped for when she stepped off that stagecoach. The boarding house was easy to find, a two-story white building with a wraparound porch where several elderly men sat in rocking chairs, watching the world go by. Mrs. Patterson was a stern-faced woman in her 60s who looked Emma up and down with calculating eyes. "Dorothy Murphy called ahead," she said without preamble. "Rooms $5 a week, paid in advance. No visitors after 9, no drinking, and absolutely no men in the rooms. You break my rules, you're out on the street. Understood?" Emma nodded quickly, counting out $5 precious from her meager savings. Mrs. Patterson handed her a key and pointed toward the stairs. "Room 12, second floor. Bathrooms at the end of the hall. Suppers at 6 if you want to pay extra for it." Emma climbed the narrow stairs, her suitcase bumping against the banister with each step. The room was small but clean, with a single bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the main street. Emma sat on the edge of the bed and allowed herself a moment of relief. She had made it to Millbrook. She had a job and she had a roof over her head. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As she unpacked her few belongings, Emma thought about the journey that had brought her here. The factory job she had lost in El Paso, the landlord who had evicted her, the friends who had turned their backs when she needed help most. Her Aunt Maria had been her only family, and even though they had never met in person, Maria's letters had been a lifeline during the darkest months of Emma's life. Emma changed into her other dress, which was only slightly less worn than the one she had traveled in, and prepared for her first day of work. She braided her long, dark hair and pinched her cheeks to give them some color. In the small mirror above the washstand, she saw a young woman who looked older than her 24 years, marked by hardship but not broken by it. The walk back to the diner took only a few minutes, but Emma was aware of every pair of eyes that followed her progress down Main Street. She held her head high and kept walking, determined not to let the town's curiosity intimidate her. She had faced worse than small-town gossip and survived. Dorothy put Emma to work immediately, showing her how to operate the coffee machine, where the dishes were kept, and how to take orders. "Most of our customers are regulars," Dorothy explained. "They'll test you at first, see what you're made of. Just be polite and work hard and they'll come around." Emma nodded, grateful for the guidance. The dinner rush was busier than Emma had expected for such a small town. Ranchers, store owners, and their families filled the diner, and Emma found herself rushing between tables, taking orders and serving food. Her feet ached in her worn shoes, but she didn't complain. She was grateful to be working, to be earning money, to be building something resembling a life. It was during the dinner rush that she first encountered the town's elite. Victoria Ashford swept into the diner like she owned the place, her perfectly coiffed hair and expensive dress making Emma feel even more conscious of her own appearance. Victoria was followed by two other women, equally well-dressed and equally aware of their social position. "I'll have the usual," Victoria announced without looking at Emma, "and make sure the coffee is fresh this time." Emma nodded and hurried to fill the order, aware that every move she made was being scrutinized. She could hear the women's conversation from across the room, their voices carrying despite their attempts at discretion. "Did you see that girl who got off the stagecoach this morning?" one of them whispered. "Looking like something the cat dragged in. I heard she's working here now." Victoria's laugh was sharp and unkind. "Well, I suppose every town needs someone to do the menial labor, as long as she knows her place." Emma's cheeks burned with embarrassment and anger, but she kept working. She had encountered people like Victoria before, people who thought their wealth and social position gave them the right to look down on others. Emma delivered their food with a polite smile and professional demeanor, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her rattled. As the evening wore on, Emma began to settle into the rhythm of the work. She learned the names of the regular customers, memorized their usual orders, and started to feel like maybe she could make this work. The tips weren't much, but combined with her wages, she might be able to save enough to eventually rent a small apartment of her own. It was nearly closing time when Marcus Thompson walked back into the diner. Emma had noticed him earlier during the dinner rush, sitting quietly in his corner booth, but she hadn't had a chance to take his order. Now, with most of the other customers gone, he approached the counter where Emma was cleaning coffee cups. "Miss Rodriguez," he said, his voice deep and pleasant. "I'm Marcus Thompson. I wanted to introduce myself properly." Emma looked up, surprised that he knew her name. Marcus was tall and broad-shouldered, with kind eyes and hands that showed he wasn't afraid of hard work despite his obvious wealth. "Mr. Thompson," Emma replied, unsure of the proper protocol. She had heard his name mentioned throughout the evening, always with a tone of respect and sometimes awe. The Thompson family ranch was apparently the economic backbone of the community, and Marcus himself was considered the most eligible bachelor in 3 counties. "I hope you don't mind me saying, but I admire your courage," Marcus said, his eyes meeting hers directly. "It takes strength to start over in a new place. I wanted you to know that not everyone in Millbrook judges people by their circumstances." Emma felt tears prick her eyes at his unexpected kindness. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson. That means more than you know." Emma's voice was steady, but Marcus could see the emotion in her eyes. There was something about this young woman that intrigued him, something that went beyond her obvious hardships. She had a dignity and grace that couldn't be taught or bought. Dorothy, who had been listening from the kitchen, came out to join them. "Marcus, you be careful now. Emma's had a long day and she doesn't need any more excitement." But her tone was gentle, and Emma could see the affection between Dorothy and Marcus. It was clear that despite his wealth and status, Marcus was genuinely respected rather than feared. Marcus smiled at Dorothy's protective tone. "I was just being neighborly, Dorothy. Miss Rodriguez seems like she could use some friends in town." He turned back to Emma. "If you ever need anything, anything at all, please don't hesitate to ask. The Thompson Ranch is about 10 miles north of town. Everyone knows where it is." After Marcus left, Dorothy studied Emma with calculating eyes. "That boy's got his eye on you, I can tell. Marcus Thompson doesn't go out of his way to introduce himself to every new girl in town. You be careful, Emma. His family's got expectations and the town's got opinions. It could make things complicated for you." Emma nodded, understanding the warning. She had no illusions about her place in Millbrook's social hierarchy. She was the poor girl who had arrived in rags, and Marcus Thompson was the wealthy rancher who could have his pick of any woman in Texas. The idea that he might be interested in her seemed impossible, but there had been something in his eyes when he looked at her, something that made her heart beat a little faster. As Emma walked back to the boarding house that night, she reflected on her first day in Millbrook. She had a job, a place to stay, and perhaps the beginning of a friendship with Dorothy Murphy. She had also encountered the town's social divisions and made at least one enemy in Victoria Ashford. But most surprisingly, she had met Marcus Thompson, a man who seemed to see past her circumstances to something worthwhile underneath. The next morning, Emma woke before dawn, determined to prove herself worthy of Dorothy's trust. She dressed carefully in her better dress and braided her hair neatly before walking to the diner. The early morning air was cool and fresh, and Emma felt a sense of possibility that had been missing from her life for months. Dorothy was already in the kitchen preparing for the breakfast rush. "You're early," she observed approvingly. "I like that in an employee. The coffee's ready and I need you to set up the tables. We get a good crowd for breakfast, especially on Wednesdays when the ranchers come to town for supplies." Emma worked efficiently, wiping down tables and setting out silverware. She was determined to learn everything she could about the diner's operation, to make herself indispensable. As she worked, she could see the town beginning to wake up through the windows. Shopkeepers were opening their doors, children were walking to school, and the daily life of Millbrook was beginning. The breakfast crowd was indeed busy, and Emma found herself rushing between tables, pouring coffee and taking orders. The customers were friendlier than they had been the previous evening, and several of them made an effort to welcome her to town. She began to feel like maybe she could fit in here after all. It was during the breakfast rush that she first encountered real trouble. Victoria Ashford came in with her friends, but this time they were accompanied by a man Emma didn't recognize. He was well dressed but had a cruel look in his eyes that made Emma immediately uncomfortable. "This is the girl I was telling you about, Bradford," Victoria said loudly, clearly intending for Emma to hear. "The one who showed up looking like a vagrant. I'm surprised Dorothy hired her. You never know what kind of people you're letting into your establishment these days." Bradford Ashford, Victoria's brother, looked Emma up and down with obvious disdain. "She certainly doesn't look like she belongs here," he said, his voice carrying across the diner. "I hope she's not planning to stay long. Towns like Millbrook need to maintain certain standards." Emma's hands trembled slightly as she poured their coffee, but she kept her expression neutral. She had dealt with bullies before, and she knew that responding would only make things worse. But she could feel the eyes of the other customers on her, and she knew that her reaction would be talked about all over town. "Will there be anything else?" Emma asked politely, setting down the coffee pot. Victoria smiled coldly. "Actually, yes. I'd like to speak to Dorothy about the quality of service here. It's declined significantly since yesterday." Dorothy appeared as if she had been waiting for this moment. "Is there a problem, Victoria?" she asked, her voice deceptively calm. Victoria's smile faltered slightly at Dorothy's direct approach. "I'm just concerned about the reputation of this establishment. When you hire people of questionable character, it reflects poorly on the entire town." The diner fell silent, and Emma felt her face burn with embarrassment. She had been in town for less than 24 hours, and already she was being publicly humiliated. She opened her mouth to defend herself, but Dorothy stepped forward. "Victoria Ashford," Dorothy said, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "I've been running this diner for 20 years, and I've never had a customer question my judgment before. Emma Rodriguez is a fine young woman who's working hard to build a better life for herself. If you have a problem with that, you're welcome to take your business elsewhere." The confrontation might have escalated further, but at that moment, Marcus Thompson walked through the door. He took in the scene immediately. his eyes moving from Victoria's flushed face to Emma's mortified expression to Dorothy's defensive stance. Without saying a word, he walked directly to the counter and sat down. "Good morning, Dorothy," he said pleasantly. "I'll have the usual, and I'd like Miss Rodriguez to take care of me this morning. I heard she's doing excellent work." His voice was calm, but there was an underlying steel that made it clear he was making a statement rather than a simple request. Victoria's face went white with shock. In all the years she had known Marcus Thompson, he had never shown interest in any woman of Emma's social class. The fact that he was publicly requesting her service was tantamount to a declaration of protection, and everyone in the diner knew it. Bradford Ashford, reading the situation correctly, stood up and threw money on the table. "Come on, Victoria. We have better things to do than waste time in places that don't know how to treat their clientele properly." Victoria followed him out, but not before shooting Emma a look that promised this wasn't over. The tension in the diner slowly dissipated as conversations resumed, but Emma could feel the weight of what had just happened. Marcus Thompson had publicly defended her, and that would have consequences she couldn't even imagine. She approached his table with coffee, her hand still shaking slightly. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You didn't have to do that." Marcus looked up at her, and she saw something in his eyes that made her heart skip. "Yes, I did," he said simply. "No one deserves to be treated like that, especially not someone who's just trying to make an honest living." Emma poured his coffee, acutely aware that every person in the diner was watching their interaction. She had wanted to blend in, to quietly build a new life, but it seemed that fate had other plans. Marcus Thompson's intervention had protected her from Victoria's cruelty, but it had also marked her as someone under his protection, which would bring its own set of complications. As she walked back to the kitchen, Emma realized that her simple plan to start over in a small town was becoming much more complicated than she had anticipated. She had made enemies and found protectors, and somehow she had caught the attention of the most powerful man in the county. The question was whether she was strong enough to handle whatever came next. The rest of the morning passed quietly, but Emma could feel the undercurrent of tension that seemed to follow her wherever she went. The other customers were polite but curious, and she caught fragments of whispered conversations about Marcus Thompson's unusual behavior and her own mysterious background. During her lunch break, Emma walked to the small general store to buy some necessities. The store owner, Mr. Patterson, was Mrs. Patterson's husband, and he greeted her with cautious friendliness. "How are you settling in, Miss Rodriguez?" he asked as she gathered soap and other toiletries. "Very well, thank you," Emma replied, counting out her money carefully. Every penny mattered when you were living on diner wages and tips. Mr. Patterson watched her count and seemed to soften slightly. Dorothy Murphy's a good woman to work for. She's fair and honest. You stick with her and you'll do fine in this town." Emma nodded gratefully, but she could see the questions in his eyes. Like everyone else in Millbrook, he was curious about her story, about what had brought her to their small town with nothing but a suitcase and determination. She had become the subject of speculation, and she knew that every move she made would be watched and analyzed. As she walked back to the diner, Emma noticed a familiar figure leaning against the building across the street. Marcus Thompson was waiting for her, his hat in his hands and a serious expression on his face. Emma's heart began to race as she approached him. "Miss Rodriguez," he said, falling into step beside her. "I was hoping I could speak with you privately. Would you walk with me for a few minutes?" Emma glanced around, aware that they were already attracting attention from passers-by. "I don't think that would be appropriate, Mr. Thompson. People are already talking." Marcus stopped walking and turned to face her. "Emma, may I call you Emma? I know this is unconventional, but I believe in speaking plainly. I'm attracted to you, and I'd like to get to know you better. I don't care what people think, and I don't care about social conventions. I care about character, and you have more character than anyone I've met in this town." Emma stared at him, speechless. In her 24 years, no man had ever spoken to her so directly or so honestly. She had been courted before, but never by someone like Marcus Thompson, and never with such straightforward sincerity. "Mr. Thompson, I appreciate your kindness, but you don't know anything about me. I'm not the kind of woman that someone in your position usually associates with." "You're exactly the kind of woman I want to associate with," Marcus replied firmly. "You're honest, hardworking, and you don't put on airs. You treat people with respect regardless of their station in life. Those are the qualities I value, not social standing or family connections." Emma felt tears prick her eyes at his words. After months of feeling worthless and discarded, Marcus's respect meant more than he could know. But she was also realistic about their situation. "Mr. Thompson, even if I were interested, which I'm not saying I am, there would be too many obstacles. Your family, your social position, the expectations of the community. It would be impossible." Marcus stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Emma, I've spent my entire life meeting other people's expectations. I've dated the daughters of prominent families, attended social events I had no interest in, and lived according to rules I never agreed to. I'm 32 years old, and I've never met a woman who made me want to break those rules. Until now." Emma looked into his eyes and saw something that both thrilled and terrified her. This wasn't a game or a passing fancy. Marcus Thompson was serious about his interest in her, and that realization changed everything. She had come to Millbrook to start over, to build a quiet life away from the disappointments of her past. But Marcus was offering her something she had never dared to dream of, a chance at real happiness with a man who saw her worth. "I need time to think," Emma said finally. "This is all happening too fast. I've been in town for one day, and you're talking about breaking social conventions and defying expectations. I'm not sure I'm ready for that kind of attention." Marcus nodded, understanding her hesitation. "I'll give you time. But Emma, I want you to know that I'm not going anywhere. I've waited 32 years to meet someone like you, and I'm not going to let social pressure or family expectations keep me from pursuing what could be the most important relationship of my life." As they reached the diner, Emma turned to face him one more time. "Why me, Mr. Thompson? You could have any woman in Texas. Why are you interested in someone like me?" Marcus smiled, and for a moment he looked younger and more vulnerable than she had seen him before. "Because when I look at you, I see strength, dignity, and genuine kindness. You didn't ask for special treatment when you arrived in town. You didn't expect anyone to take care of you. You just put your head down and worked hard to build something for yourself. That's the kind of woman I want to build a life with." Emma watched him walk away, her mind reeling from their conversation. Marcus Thompson, the most eligible bachelor in 3 counties, was interested in her. Not just interested, but serious about pursuing a relationship despite all the obstacles they would face. It seemed impossible, but the sincerity in his voice and the look in his eyes told her he meant every word. The afternoon shift at the diner passed in a blur. Emma found herself thinking about Marcus's words instead of focusing on her work. She made mistakes, spilled coffee, and mixed up orders. Dorothy noticed her distraction and pulled her aside during a quiet moment. "Emma, honey, you've been in another world all afternoon. Is everything all right?" Dorothy's concern was genuine, and Emma felt a wave of gratitude for the older woman's kindness. "I'm sorry, Dorothy. I'll do better. I was just thinking about something." Dorothy studied her with knowing eyes. "This wouldn't have anything to do with Marcus Thompson, would it? I saw him talking to you outside earlier. Half the town probably saw it too." Emma's face flushed with embarrassment. "He was just being friendly. I'm sure it doesn't mean anything." "Emma, child, I've known Marcus Thompson since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. He's never shown this kind of interest in any woman, rich or poor. If he's pursuing you, it's because he sees something special. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Emma shook her head, feeling overwhelmed. "I don't know, Dorothy. I came here to start over, to build a simple life. I never expected anything like this. And even if I was interested, which I'm not saying I am, it would be complicated. People like Victoria Ashford would make my life miserable." Dorothy's expression hardened at the mention of Victoria. "Victoria Ashford is a spoiled brat who's been trying to catch Marcus's attention for years. She's jealous and mean-spirited, and she'd cause trouble for any woman Marcus showed interest in. But Emma, You can't let people like Victoria dictate your life. If Marcus Thompson wants to court you, and if you're interested in him, then you have every right to pursue that happiness." Emma spent the rest of her shift thinking about Dorothy's words. She had spent so much of her life letting other people's opinions and expectations limit her choices. Maybe it was time to stop letting fear and social pressure keep her from taking chances on happiness. That evening, as Emma walked back to the boarding house, she made a decision. She would give Marcus Thompson a chance to prove his sincerity. She would be cautious and protect her heart, but she wouldn't let the Victoria Ashfords of the world keep her from exploring what could be the most important relationship of her life. The next morning brought unexpected visitors to the diner. Emma was wiping down tables when the door opened and two well-dressed women entered. They were older than Victoria, with an air of authority that immediately put Emma on edge. Dorothy emerged from the kitchen, her expression carefully neutral. "Good morning, Mrs. Thompson, Mrs. Harrison. What brings you to the diner today?" Emma's heart sank as she realized she was looking at Marcus's mother and sister. They had come to see her, and she doubted it was a social call. Margaret Thompson was an elegant woman in her 50s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Her daughter, Helen Harrison, was equally well-dressed and shared her mother's intimidating presence. They took seats at a corner table and requested coffee, but Emma could tell they weren't here for the food. "Miss Rodriguez," Margaret Thompson said after Emma had served their coffee, "I'm Marcus's mother. I believe you know my son." Emma nodded, unsure of how to respond. "Yes, ma'am. He's been very kind to me since I arrived in town." Margaret studied Emma with calculating eyes. "I'm sure he has. Marcus has always been soft-hearted when it comes to charity cases. However, I'm concerned that you might be misinterpreting his kindness for something more than it is." Emma felt her face flush with embarrassment and anger. "I'm not sure what you mean, Mrs. Thompson. Your son and I have barely spoken." But even as she said it, Emma knew it wasn't entirely true. Their conversation the previous day had been about much more than kindness to a stranger. Helen Harrison leaned forward, her voice cold and precise. "Miss Rodriguez, let me be direct. My brother is one of the most eligible bachelors in Texas. He has responsibilities to his family and his social position. While I'm sure you're a nice enough girl, you must understand that any romantic involvement between you and Marcus would be inappropriate and ultimately harmful to both of you." Emma's hands trembled as she set down the coffee pot. She had expected opposition, but having it delivered so directly and publicly was humiliating. "I understand your concerns, Mrs. Harrison, but I think you're overestimating my influence on your brother. He's free to make his own choices about who he associates with." Margaret Thompson's eyes flashed with anger. "Miss Rodriguez, you've been in this town for 3 days. In that time, you've already caused quite a stir. My son has never shown such public interest in any woman, and certainly not someone of your background. I'm not trying to be cruel, but I think it's important that you understand the reality of your situation. Emma straightened her shoulders, drawing on reserves of strength she didn't know she had. Mrs. Thompson, I understand that you're concerned about your son's reputation, but I haven't done anything to pursue him or encourage his attention. If he's interested in me, that's his choice to make, not mine to control. The conversation might have continued, but at that moment, the diner door opened and Marcus Thompson walked in. He took one look at the scene, his mother and sister sitting stiffly at a corner table, Emma standing nearby with tears in her eyes, and his expression darkened with anger. "Mother Helen, what are you doing here?" His voice was calm, but Emma could hear the steel underneath. Margaret Thompson straightened in her chair, clearly not expecting to be confronted by her son. "Marcus, dear, we were just having a friendly conversation with Miss Rodriguez. We wanted to welcome her to town properly." Margaret's tone was sweet, but Marcus wasn't fooled. He had known his mother too long to miss the signs of her interference. "I'm sure you were," Marcus replied dryly. He turned to Emma, his expression softening. "Emma, are you all right? You look upset." Emma nodded, not trusting her voice. She was mortified that this confrontation was happening in front of the other customers, all of whom were pretending not to listen while hanging on every word. Marcus turned back to his mother and sister. "I think this conversation is over. Emma has work to do, and you have business to attend to. I'll speak with you both later." His tone made it clear that this was not a request but a command. Margaret Thompson stood up, her dignity intact despite her son's dismissal. "Of course, dear. We were just leaving. Miss Rodriguez it was. Enlightening to meet you." She placed money on the table and walked out, Helen following behind her. Emma sank into the nearest chair, her legs suddenly weak. The confrontation had been exactly what she had feared, and she knew it was only the beginning. Marcus's family would never accept her, and their opposition would make any relationship impossible. Marcus sat down across from her, his expression concerned. "Emma, I'm sorry about that. My mother and sister had no right to ambush you like that." Emma looked up at him, tears still threatening to fall. "They're right, though, aren't they? This is impossible. We're from different worlds, and your family will never accept me." "Emma, look at me," Marcus said firmly. "I don't care what my family thinks. I don't care what anyone thinks. I care about you, and I care about what we could build together. My mother and sister are concerned about social conventions and family reputation. I'm concerned about finding someone I can love and respect for the rest of my life." Emma wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "But Marcus, it's not that simple. I've already made enemies in this town. Your family's opposition will only make things worse. I came here to start over, to build a quiet life. I never wanted to be the center of controversy." Marcus reached across the table and took her hand. "Emma, sometimes the things most worth having are the things we have to fight for. I've spent my entire life avoiding controversy, playing it safe, meeting everyone else's expectations. I'm tired of living that way. I want to live for myself, and I want to live for you." Emma stared at their joined hands, overwhelmed by the sincerity in his voice. She had never had anyone fight for her before, never had anyone willing to risk social disapproval to be with her. It was both exhilarating and terrifying. "What are you saying, Marcus?" she whispered. "What exactly are you proposing?" Marcus squeezed her hand gently. "I'm saying that I want to court you properly. I want to take you to dinner, to church social events, to introduce you to my friends. I want everyone in this town to know that you're important to me." Emma's heart raced at his words. "And if your family cuts you off, if the town turns against you, if you lose everything you've worked for," Marcus smiled, and Emma saw a determination in his eyes that took her breath away. "Then I'll build something new. Emma, I have money saved, investments outside the ranch. I'm not dependent on my family's approval for my survival. But more importantly, I'd rather be poor with you than rich without you." Emma stared at him, unable to believe what she was hearing. Marcus Thompson, one of the wealthiest men in Texas, was telling her he would give up everything to be with her. It was like something out of a fairy tale, too good to be true. "Marcus, you don't really know me," she said desperately. "You don't know where I come from, what I've been through. You might change your mind when you learn the truth about my past." Marcus's grip on her hand tightened. "Then tell me everything. Let me prove to you that nothing in your past could change how I feel about you." Emma took a deep breath, knowing that she was about to share secrets she had never told anyone. "I grew up in poverty in El Paso," she began. "My parents died when I was 16, and I've been on my own ever since. I worked in a factory for 5 years, barely making enough to survive. I was engaged once to a man who seemed kind and honest. But when I lost my job and couldn't contribute to our household expenses, he threw me out. He said he couldn't afford to support a wife who couldn't pull her own weight." Marcus's expression darkened with anger at the mention of her former fiancé, but he didn't interrupt. Emma continued, her voice growing stronger as she shared her story. "I was evicted from my apartment, and I spent 3 weeks living on the streets before my aunt's letter arrived. I had never met her, but she was my mother's sister, and she offered me a chance to start over. By the time I saved enough money for the stagecoach ticket, she had already passed away. I came to Millbrook with nothing but hope and determination." Marcus was quiet for a long moment after she finished. Emma held her breath, waiting for his reaction, expecting him to realize that she was too damaged, too poor, too complicated for someone in his position. "Emma," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion, "thank you for trusting me with your story. It doesn't change anything except to make me admire you even more. You've survived things that would have broken most people, and you've done it with grace and dignity. You're the strongest woman I've ever met." Emma felt tears streaming down her face at his words. For the first time in her life, someone had heard her story and seen strength instead of failure, courage instead of shame. "Marcus, I don't know what to say. I've never had anyone look at me the way you do."